Hey everyone, today I'll be telling a story about what really happened in a night at a caveman camp. If you enjoy these stories, make sure to subscribe for more. Picture this, you're 65 years old, standing in your driveway on a summer evening, maybe hosing down the truck or checking the air in your tires. The sun's getting low, painting everything that warm orange you've seen thousands of times. In about an hour, you'll head inside, flip on the porch light, lock the front door, and settle into your recliner with the remote control and maybe a cold beer. Your biggest worry tonight? Whether the air conditioning will keep up with the heat, or if you remembered to record that History Channel special about World War II. Now imagine the exact same moment, same time of day, but it's 50,000 years ago. You're standing outside your temporary shelter, maybe a rock overhang, or a lean-to made of branches and animal hides. The sun's painting everything the same orange, but in about an hour, you'll be huddled around a fire with your family, listening to every sound in the darkness. Because out there, past the edge of your firelight, things are moving. Big things, hungry things. Things that see you and your sleeping children as dinner. Your biggest worry tonight? Whether you and everyone you love will still be breathing when that orange sun comes back up. That's the world our ancestors lived in every single day. And here's what's fascinating. Those Stone Age nights, those terrifying, exhausting, life or death evenings around a campfire, they didn't just shape how early humans survived. They shaped us. They're why you still check the locks twice before bed. They're why you sleep better with a nightlight in the hallway. They're why you feel most comfortable with your back to a wall and a clear view of the door. Every instinct that's kept you alive for 6 decades, every gut feeling that steered you away from trouble, every protective urge you felt toward your family, it all started around those prehistoric campfires, where getting through the night was never guaranteed. You want to know what a night in a caveman camp was really like? It wasn't some romantic scene from a museum diorama, with noble savages sitting peacefully around a fire, gazing at the stars and contemplating the meaning of life. It was more like being the night watchman at a construction site in the worst part of town, except the site has no fence, no security cameras, no radio to call for backup, and instead of dealing with vandals and thieves, you're dealing with saber-toothed cats and cave bears. Our ancestors weren't just camping, they were running a 24-hour security operation where failure meant extinction. Think about the last time you went camping. Real camping, not parking the RV at a KOA with full hookups and a camp store 50 yards away. I'm talking about the kind where you drove down a dirt road until you couldn't see house lights anymore, set up your tent, and realized just how dark the woods get when the sun goes down. Remember that feeling? That little voice in the back of your head that started cataloging every sound, every shadow, every rustling bush. That voice has been talking for 50,000 years. It's the same voice that told your Stone Age great-great-grandfather to bank the coals just right, to position the sleeping area so everyone had a clear path to grab a weapon, to keep one eye open all night long, because relaxing your guard meant waking up as something else's breakfast. The difference is, when you went camping, you knew there was a highway 3 miles back that way, a ranger station 12 miles north, and a hospital 40 minutes from there. Your cell phone might not have signal, but civilization was still within reach. For cavemen, there was no cavalry coming. There was no backup plan. There was just the fire, the darkness, and whatever happened between sunset and sunrise. And somehow, they made it work. For thousands of generations, they figured out how to keep their families alive through nights that would terrify a modern Navy SEAL. They developed strategies, techniques, and social systems that were so effective, so perfectly adapted to the dangers they faced, that we're still here talking about it. This isn't ancient history we're talking about. This is the foundation course in human survival, taught by professors who couldn't afford to give failing grades because failing meant dying. Every lesson they learned, every system they developed, every habit they passed down was tested under the ultimate pressure, real life or death stakes, every single night. What did they know that we've forgotten? How did they organize their camps to maximize safety and minimize risk? What were their techniques for making fire last all night when every ember was precious? How did they divide up the responsibility of staying alert when everyone was exhausted? What did they do when someone got hurt or sick in the middle of the night? How did they handle conflicts and disagreements when stress was high and space was tight? And maybe most importantly, what can we learn from their nighttime routines that applies to our lives today? Because whether you're securing your home, planning for emergencies, or just trying to understand why certain situations make you uncomfortable, there's wisdom in how our ancestors handled the most dangerous part of every day. We're going to take you through an entire night in a Stone Age camp. From the moment the sun starts dropping toward the horizon until the first light of dawn brings relief and starts the cycle all over again. You'll see how they picked their campsites like experienced soldiers choosing defensive positions. You'll learn the techniques they used to build and maintain fires that meant the difference between life and death. You'll understand how they organized their social structure around the simple reality that someone had to stay awake and alert while everyone else slept. You'll find out what they ate for dinner when the hunting was good and what they did when it wasn't. You'll hear about the sounds that came from the darkness beyond their firelight and how they learned to tell the difference between a branch falling and a predator stalking. You'll discover how they arranged their sleeping areas, settled disputes, cared for the sick and injured, and made the countless small decisions that determined whether morning would find them alive or dead. This isn't a story about primitive people stumbling around in the dark, hoping for the best. This is a story about humans at their most resourceful, most alert, most united by necessity. These were people who understood, in ways we can barely imagine, that preparation and vigilance weren't optional. They were everything. Every technique they developed, every system they created, every rule they followed was earned through trial and error, where error meant you didn't get to try again. They were running a masterclass in risk management, threat assessment, and emergency preparedness, and they were doing it with stone tools and animal skins. You think you know what stress feels like? Try being responsible for keeping your family safe when the sun goes down and you're armed with a wooden spear, surrounded by predators that could kill you without breaking stride. Try making decisions about food, shelter, and security when a single mistake could end your genetic line forever. But here's the thing that might surprise you. They weren't miserable. They weren't cowering in terror every night, paralyzed by fear. They had routines, traditions, even forms of entertainment that helped them cope with the dangers they faced. They told stories, shared knowledge, strengthened bonds. They found ways to maintain morale and group cohesion, even under conditions that would break most modern people. They understood something that we're just starting to rediscover, that having a plan, knowing your role, and trusting the people around you can make even the most dangerous situations manageable. They knew that preparation and practice could turn panic into procedure. They learned that the right habits, repeated night after night, could mean the difference between chaos and control. Want to understand why humans developed language, art, religion, and complex social structures? Start with those Stone Age nights. When you're sitting around a fire, depending on each other for survival, communication becomes critical. Trust becomes everything. Leadership becomes a matter of life and death. Innovation becomes the difference between making it through winter and not seeing spring. Every major advancement in human civilization can be traced back to those campfires where our ancestors had to solve problems that would challenge the best minds today. How do you coordinate group activities when everyone's tired and stressed? How do you allocate limited resources fairly? How do you maintain discipline and cooperation when individual survival might conflict with group survival? How do you pass on critical knowledge to the next generation when there's no written language, no schools, no books? They figured it out. And they figured it out so well that their solutions became hardwired into human nature. The leadership styles that work best under pressure, the communication patterns that build trust quickly, the decision-making processes that function when time is short and stakes are high. Our ancestors pioneered all of it around those ancient campfires, when getting it right meant living and getting it wrong meant dying. So, when you're wondering why you feel most comfortable with a clear view of all the exits, or why you automatically take charge when a crisis hits, or why you trust some people instantly and others never, remember, you're carrying 50,000 years of nighttime survival programming. Your ancestors spent millennia learning what works and what doesn't when lives are on the line, and they pass those lessons down to you through your DNA and your culture. Understanding how they lived, how they organized their camps, how they handled the dangers and stresses of Stone Age nights, it's not just history. It's a manual for understanding yourself, your instincts, and your capabilities. It's insight into how humans function under pressure, how we build trust, how we make decisions when everything matters. And it starts with the moment when our ancestors looked at the setting sun and realized they had maybe an hour to get everything right. Because once darkness fell, there were no second chances, no do-overs, no margin for error. The sun is dropping lower now, painting everything orange. Time to see how they handled what happened next. But first, they had to choose exactly where to make their stand against the night. And that choice, that critical decision about location, could determine whether they'd be alive to see another sunset. You know that feeling when you're looking for a parking spot at the mall during Christmas shopping season? You're circling the lot, checking every angle, weighing your options. Too close to the cart return and some kid's going to ding your door. Too far from the entrance and you'll be hauling bags through sleet. Park under that tree and bird droppings are guaranteed. That spot looks perfect until you notice it's actually a compact car space and your pickup won't fit. Now multiply that decision-making process by about 1,000, because instead of protecting your paint job, you're protecting your life. That's what our Stone Age ancestors faced every single evening when they needed to choose where to spend the night. Except their version of a bad parking spot didn't mean a long walk or a door ding. It meant waking up dead. These weren't people just wandering around until they got tired and decided to plop down wherever they happened to be. They were like seasoned real estate agents, except instead of looking for good schools and low property taxes, they were evaluating defensibility, water access, wind patterns, and escape routes. They had a mental checklist that would put a home inspector to shame, and they ran through it every single time they needed to set up camp. Think about the last time you had to choose a campsite at a state park. Even with marked sites, picnic tables, and fire rings already in place, you probably spent a few minutes walking around, checking the options. Level ground? Close enough to the restrooms? Not too close to that family with the screaming kids? Good drainage in case it rains? Away from widowmakers, those dead branches hanging overhead, just waiting to fall on your tent? Our ancestors had the same thought process, but their checklist was longer and the consequences were higher, a lot higher. First thing they looked for, elevation with a view, not because they wanted a scenic overlook for their morning coffee, but because height meant you could see trouble coming. You ever notice how every old farmhouse sits on a little rise, even if it's just a few feet higher than the surrounding land? That's not an accident. Farmers learned from their ancestors that a little elevation gives you a big advantage when it comes to security. Same principle applied 50,000 years ago. Get yourself up on a ridge, a hill, even a small rise, and you can spot approaching danger while it's still far enough away to do something about it. Predators don't like attacking uphill anyway, makes them work harder, and most animals, like most people, prefer the easy way when possible. But not too high. Get up on a mountaintop and you're exposed to wind and weather. You become a target for lightning, and you're advertising your location to everything within 50 miles. It's like the difference between buying a house on a hill with a nice view and buying a house on a cliff where every storm tries to blow you into the next county. Sweet spot? High enough to see what's coming, low enough to stay out of the worst weather. Second consideration, water, but not too much water. You need drinking water within a reasonable distance, but you don't want to camp right next to the river or lake. Why? Same reason you don't build your house in a floodplain. Water levels change, weather changes. That peaceful stream can become a raging torrent in a matter of hours. Plus, watering holes are like the local bar on Friday night. Everybody shows up eventually, including the folks you'd rather avoid. Every animal in the area needs water, which means every predator in the area knows where the prey animals are going to be. Camp too close to water and you're basically setting up in the middle of Grand Central Station for the carnivore crowd. But camp too far away and you're making multiple trips a day to collect water, carrying heavy containers over rough terrain, leaving your camp undefended while you're gone. It's a balancing act, like choosing a house that's close enough to town for convenience, but far enough out to avoid the traffic and noise. Third factor, wind direction. This one's crucial, and it's something most modern people never think about because we've got central air and heating systems that make wind direction irrelevant to our daily comfort. Not so for cavemen. Wind direction determined everything from where they could safely build their fire to whether they'd be able to smell predators approaching. Get the wind wrong, and smoke from your fire either blows right in your face all night or advertises your location to every creature within miles. But get it right, and that same wind becomes your early warning system. Animals smell different from plants, and predators smell different from prey animals. A caveman with 40 years of experience could probably tell you what was moving around within a quarter mile just by reading the wind, the same way an old farmer can predict weather by watching cloud formations. They also used wind as camouflage for their own scent. Position yourself downwind from areas where predators might approach, and they can't smell you until they're close enough that you can do something about it. Position yourself wrong, and you're sending out dinner invitations hours before you even know you've got company. Fourth consideration, escape routes. Always, always, always have a way out, preferably 2 ways out in case one gets blocked. This is something every military veteran understands instinctively, and something every police officer learns early in their career. Never put yourself in a position where you can get cornered, because cornered animals fight with the desperation of the doomed, and even if you win, you're probably going to get hurt in the process. Cavemen couldn't afford to get hurt. No hospitals, no antibiotics, no surgical procedures. A serious injury meant slow death, either from infection or from being unable to keep up with the group, so they always made sure they had options. Good campsite, multiple exit routes leading in different directions. That could be used even in the dark. Bad campsite, dead-end location where one predator could block your only way out and turn you into canned food. Think about how you automatically position yourself in a restaurant. If you're like most men your age, especially if you've got any military or law enforcement background, you probably prefer to sit with your back to the wall and a clear view of the entrance. That's not paranoia. That's wisdom earned through generations of ancestors who learned the hard way that positioning matters. Now let's talk about the 3 main types of overnight shelter our ancestors had to choose from: caves, rock shelters, and open-air camps. Each one had advantages and disadvantages, like different models of pickup trucks. All of them can get the job done, but each one's better suited for specific conditions. Caves were the luxury option, the Cadillac of Stone Age accommodations. Complete protection from weather, natural barriers on most sides, usually just one entrance to defend. If you could find a good cave in the right location, you were living like kings. But caves came with their own problems. First, if you found a good cave, chances were something else had found it first. Cave bears didn't get their name because they were small and friendly. They were basically grizzly bears on steroids, and they considered caves their personal property. Evicting a cave bear from his home was like trying to repo a car from someone who's got a shotgun and no sense of humor about it. Even if the cave was empty, it might not stay that way. Animals looking for shelter don't knock first. You could go to sleep in your cozy cave and wake up sharing space with a very confused and very angry predator who just wanted to get out of the rain. Plus, caves could be traps. One entrance means easy defense, but it also means if something gets between you and that entrance, you're stuck. No escape route, no options, No way out except through whatever's blocking your door. And then there was the ventilation problem. Build a fire in a cave for warmth and light, and you might end up poisoning yourself with smoke if the airflow isn't right. Enough prehistoric skeletons have been found in caves with evidence of smoke inhalation that we know this wasn't just a theoretical problem. Rock shelters were the compromise choice, like buying a used truck that's reliable but not fancy. These were natural overhangs, cliff faces that provided partial protection from above but left you open on the sides. Not as secure as a cave, but not as risky either. Advantage of a rock shelter: weather protection from above, natural backstop that couldn't be attacked from behind, usually good drainage so you wouldn't end up sleeping in a puddle if it rained. Most rock shelters also had decent airflow, so you could maintain a fire without suffocating yourself. Disadvantage: you were still exposed on 3 sides, which meant more area to defend and more directions threats could come from. But experienced groups could work with that by positioning people and fires strategically to cover the open areas. Rock shelters were popular enough that archaeologists still find evidence of human habitation in them all over the world. Our ancestors used them for thousands of years, generation after generation, because they offered the best combination of protection and flexibility. Open-air camps were the option when you couldn't find anything better, or when the tactical situation made them the smart choice, like camping in a tent when all the hotel rooms are booked. Not ideal, but doable if you know what you're doing. Advantage of open-air camping: complete flexibility in positioning, multiple escape routes, no risk of getting trapped in an enclosed space. You could set up exactly where the wind, water, and elevation were optimal without being limited by natural shelter availability. Disadvantage: exposure to weather and complete dependence on artificial barriers like fires, thorn bushes, or constructed windbreaks for protection. Everything had to be built from scratch every single night. But here's what's interesting. Some of the most successful hunter-gatherer groups preferred open-air camps, even when caves and rock shelters were available. Why? Because they'd learned that mobility and flexibility often trumped protection. Better to be uncomfortable but able to move quickly than to be comfortable but trapped. It was like the difference between sleeping in a foxhole and sleeping in a bunker. The bunker's more comfortable, but if the situation changes, you can abandon a foxhole a lot faster than you can abandon a bunker. Our ancestors also developed site selection skills that would impress a modern military engineer. They learned to read terrain like a book, spotting features that provided tactical advantages, natural choke points where they could funnel approaching threats into narrow areas that were easier to defend, hidden approaches that let them move unseen, high ground that provided observation and communication advantages. They understood something that modern people often forget: the environment isn't neutral. It's either working for you or against you, and which one depends entirely on how well you understand and use the natural features around you. A good Stone Age campsite wasn't just a place to sleep. It was a defensive position, an observation post, a staging area for hunting and gathering activities, a workshop for tool making and food preparation, and a social center where the group maintained cohesion and passed on knowledge. All of that had to be considered during the site selection process, which usually happened fast because daylight was burning and there was still a lot of work to do before dark. And once they'd picked their spot, once they'd evaluated all the factors and made their choice, they had to execute the most critical task of the entire day: building and maintaining the fire that would keep them alive through the night. Because no matter how perfect your campsite, no matter how ideal your position, no matter how well you'd planned your defenses, none of it mattered if you couldn't get a fire started and keep it burning until dawn. That fire wasn't just about warmth and light, it was about life and death. And building it right, with Stone Age tools and materials, was an art form that took years to master and seconds to lose. You know that moment when you're trying to start your lawnmower on the first warm day of spring, and it's been sitting in the garage all winter? You pull the cord once, twice, 10 times. Nothing. You check the spark plug, prime the carburetor, adjust the choke, still nothing. You're starting to sweat, getting frustrated, wondering if you should have taken it in for service last fall, like your wife suggested. Now imagine that same scenario, except instead of a stubborn mower, you're trying to start a fire with a piece of flint and a steel striker. And instead of missing one Saturday of yard work, failure means you and your family freeze to death before morning. That's the reality our Stone Age ancestors faced every single evening. No matches, no lighters, no convenient little propane torch to get things going. Just stone, steel, tinder, and the knowledge that everything depended on getting those first sparks to catch. Fire wasn't just important to cavemen. Fire was everything. It was their furnace, their security system, their kitchen stove, their workshop light, their social center, and their lifeline all rolled into one. Lose your fire, and you lost your civilization. Lose your fire at the wrong time, in the wrong place, and you lost your life. Think about how dependent you are on electricity. Cut the power to your house for a week, and see how quickly your comfortable modern life starts falling apart. No lights, no heat, no air conditioning, no refrigeration, no television, no internet, no way to charge your phone. Within hours, you'd be making plans to stay somewhere else, or at least figuring out how to get a generator running. For our ancestors, fire was their electricity, except there was no power company to call, no backup generator in the garage, no hotel down the road with working utilities. When their fire went out, they were on their own in the dark, and the dark was full of things that wanted to eat them. So they got good at fire, really good. Good enough that some of their techniques are still being rediscovered by survival experts and outdoor enthusiasts today. These weren't people who occasionally went camping on weekends. These were professionals who lived outdoors every day of their lives, and fire was their most important tool. Let's start with getting the fire lit in the first place. You've probably seen demonstrations of primitive fire starting techniques at historical reenactments or survival shows. Guy in buckskins rubbing two sticks together, taking forever to get a little smoke, making it look harder than defusing a bomb. That's not how our ancestors did it. Oh, they could make fire by friction when they had to. Bow drill, hand drill, fire plow, fire saw. They knew all the techniques. But rubbing sticks together was the last resort, like using a hand crank to start your car. Sure, it works, but you only do it when everything else has failed. The preferred method was flint and steel, or flint and iron pyrite, if they could find it. Strike a piece of flint against iron at the right angle with the right force, and you get sparks. Hot sparks. Sparks hot enough to ignite properly prepared tinder. Sounds simple, right? Try it sometime. Go buy a piece of flint and a steel striker from a camping store and see how long it takes you to actually get a fire started. Most people give up after 10 minutes and reach for the matches. It's not as easy as it looks, and it's a lot harder when you're tired, cold, stressed, and running out of daylight. The trick wasn't just in the striking technique, though that mattered. The real secret was in the preparation, the setup, the supporting materials that turned those precious sparks into sustainable flame. First, you needed tinder, not just any dry material, but specific types of organic matter that would catch a spark and hold it long enough to ignite kindling. Dry grass, shredded bark, bird nests, cattail fluff, char cloth if you could make it. Each type had different characteristics, worked better in different weather conditions, required different handling techniques. Our ancestors became experts at identifying and preparing tinder materials the way modern mechanics can identify engine problems by listening to the sound. They knew which bark fibers worked best in humid conditions, which grasses caught sparks easiest when the wind was blowing, which fungi could be processed into tinder that would smolder for hours. Then you needed kindling, small, dry sticks and twigs that would catch fire from burning tinder, but produce enough heat to ignite larger fuel wood. The progression had to be gradual and controlled. Too big a jump from tinder to fuel wood, and the fire died. Too slow a progression, and you ran out of tinder before the kindling caught. It was like tuning a carburetor. Everything had to be balanced just right, and the adjustments had to be made based on conditions that were constantly changing. humidity, wind speed, temperature, available materials. All of it affected how you built and managed your fire. And then you needed fuel wood. Different types of wood burned differently. Some caught easily but burned fast. Others took longer to ignite but burned hot and long. Some produced a lot of light. Others generated heat with minimal flame. Some woods burned clean. Others created smoke that could choke you or signal your location to unwanted visitors. Choosing the right wood for the right purpose was like selecting the right tool for a job. You wouldn't use a sledgehammer to drive finishing nails or a screwdriver to dig a hole. Same principle applied to firewood. Wrong choice, and your fire either went out when you needed it most or created problems you couldn't afford to deal with. But getting the fire started was just the beginning. Keeping it alive through a 12-hour night was where the real skill showed. You ever tended a wood-burning stove or furnace? Then you know it's not something you can just ignore once it's going. Wood burns down, coals get covered with ash, airflow needs to be adjusted. Let it go too long without attention, and you're back to square one, trying to restart from scratch. Multiply that challenge by the fact that your fuel is whatever you could gather in the immediate area. Your tools are sticks and stones, and letting the fire die means possible death for everyone depending on it. That's why Stone Age groups developed shift systems for fire maintenance. Not everyone slept at the same time. There was always someone awake, keeping watch, feeding the fire, listening for sounds from the darkness beyond the light. It wasn't random. They had rotation schedules, specific responsibilities, backup plans for when someone got sick or injured. Like any critical operation, fire maintenance was too important to leave to chance. The person on fire duty wasn't just sitting there tossing logs on the flames whenever they felt like it. They were monitoring burn rates, adjusting airflow, managing coals, conserving fuel, watching for changes in wind direction or weather that might affect combustion. They were operating a complex piece of life support equipment that happened to be made out of rocks and wood. And they were doing it while staying alert for external threats, because the fire tender was also the night watchman. They had to balance the need to keep the fire burning with the need to avoid making it so bright that it attracted unwanted attention or destroyed their night vision. Think about how your eyes adjust when you're working in the garage with just a flashlight. Look directly at the light and you're blind to everything else. Look away from the light and you can see shapes and movement in the shadows around you. Same principle applied to managing firelight for security purposes. Experienced fire tenders learned to tend the fire without looking directly at the flames, using peripheral vision and sound to monitor combustion while keeping their eyes adjusted for spotting movement in the darkness. They positioned themselves so the fire provided light for the camp without backlighting them for potential predators. They also mastered the art of banking coals, a technique that most modern people have never heard of, but that could mean the difference between life and death in a survival situation. Banking coals meant arranging the fire so that it would burn slowly and steadily for hours with minimal attention, producing heat and some light while conserving fuel. It was like setting a furnace to maintain a steady temperature overnight, except your furnace was a pile of rocks and partially burned wood. The technique involved building up a bed of coals, then covering them with a layer of ash and carefully selected fuel wood, arranged to provide just enough airflow to keep combustion going without flaring up into active flames. Done right, banked coals could keep a fire alive for 8 to 10 hours, while using a fraction of the fuel that an active fire would consume. Done wrong, and you woke up to cold ashes and the terrifying realization that you were going to have to restart from scratch in the middle of the night, possibly while predators circled just outside your rapidly shrinking circle of warmth and light. Banking coals was an art form that took years to master. You had to understand how different types of wood burned, how to create the right airflow patterns, how to judge the right amount of ash coverage, how to position fuel wood for sustained combustion. It was like being a master craftsman, except your medium was fire and your mistakes could kill people. Some groups got so good at fire management that they could keep the same fire alive for weeks or even months, moving it from camp to camp by carrying coals in special containers made from clay, hollowed gourds, or tightly woven baskets lined with wet leaves. Carrying fire was like carrying the pilot light for your entire civilization. Lose it, and you were back to the Stone Age of the Stone Age, trying to create fire from scratch with no guarantees of success. But even the most skilled fire masters occasionally faced the nightmare scenario. The fire went out completely. Maybe a sudden rainstorm overwhelmed their preparations. Maybe someone fell asleep on watch duty. Maybe the wind shifted and scattered coals beyond recovery. Maybe they just got unlucky. When that happened, when a Stone Age family woke up to cold ashes and no banked coals to restart from, they faced a crisis that makes your worst day at the office look like a minor inconvenience. Without fire, they had no protection from predators except their weapons and their numbers. No way to cook food, which meant they couldn't safely eat most of the meat they hunted or efficiently extract nutrients from many plant foods. No way to stay warm in cold weather, which could lead to hypothermia, frostbite, and death. No light to work by, which meant their productive hours were limited to daylight. Most critically, they had no way to process materials for tools, clothing, and shelter. Fire wasn't just used for cooking and warmth. It was essential for hardening wooden spear points, working animal hides into leather, making waterproof containers, producing adhesives and medicines from plants, and countless other tasks that separated humans from animals. Lose your fire completely, and you went from being a human with technology to being a clever ape with opposable thumbs. The difference between civilization and barbarism could be measured in the time it took for carefully banked coals to turn into cold ash. That's why fire maintenance was never left to chance, never assigned to the least capable person, never treated as a simple chore that anyone could handle. It was skilled work performed by people who understood that everything depended on getting it right, and it's why, even today, there's something primal and satisfying about building and tending a fire. Whether it's a backyard fire pit, a fireplace, or a campfire on a fishing trip, we still feel that connection to our ancestors who knew that fire meant life and cold ashes meant death. The sound of crackling flames, the smell of wood smoke, the warm glow that pushes back the darkness, it all triggers something deep in our DNA, some genetic memory of nights when fire was the thin line between safety and terror. But our ancestors didn't spend their evenings just staring at the flames and feeling grateful to be alive, though they probably did plenty of that too. They had work to do, food to prepare, tools to maintain, knowledge to share, and they had to figure out how to do all of it by firelight within the limited space of their secure camp while staying alert for danger. Which brings us to one of the most important activities of the Stone Age evening, preparing and sharing the meal that would give them the energy to make it through another night and another day of survival in a world that was trying to kill them. Think about the last time you hosted Thanksgiving dinner, 20 people coming to your house, and you're responsible for making sure everyone gets fed. You're juggling the turkey timer, keeping an eye on the side dishes, trying to coordinate everything so it's all ready at the same time. Meanwhile, your brother-in-law is camped out in front of the TV watching football, your teenage nephew is complaining about everything, and your sister-in-law keeps asking if you need help while somehow managing to avoid actually doing anything useful. You're stressed about having enough food, worried about running out of the good stuff before everyone gets served, and trying to keep peace in the family while making sure Great Aunt Martha gets her preferred piece of white meat and Uncle Bob doesn't monopolize all the stuffing. Now imagine that same scenario, except instead of one day a year, it's every single day. Instead of 20 people, it's your survival group of 8 to 12 individuals whose lives depend on each other. Instead of a kitchen full of modern appliances and a grocery store 10 minutes away, you've got a fire, some stone tools, and whatever you manage to find, catch, or kill in the surrounding wilderness. And instead of family drama over who gets seconds on dessert, You're dealing with life and death decisions about food allocation when there might not be enough to go around, and tomorrow's meal is entirely dependent on today's hunting and gathering success. Welcome to dinner time in the Stone Age, where every meal was a negotiation, every bite was precious, and the dinner table politics could determine who lived through winter and who didn't. Here's the first thing you need to understand about Stone Age dining. They weren't eating giant steaks every night, like some kind of prehistoric barbecue festival. The idea that early humans were master hunters who brought down woolly mammoths every weekend and feasted like kings is mostly Hollywood nonsense. Real hunting success rates for Stone Age groups? Archaeological evidence suggests somewhere between 20 and 40%, depending on the season, the local game population, and the skill level of the hunters. That means, more often than not, the hunting party came back empty-handed. Think about your own fishing or hunting experiences. Even with modern equipment, GPS navigation, weather apps, and decades of accumulated knowledge about where and when to find game, you probably don't succeed every time you go out. Now imagine doing it with wooden spears, stone-tipped arrows, and simple traps in territory where every other predator is competing for the same food sources. Most days, the protein came from small game, rabbits, squirrels, birds, fish if they were near water. Occasionally, someone would get lucky with a deer or elk. Very rarely, if they were organized enough and fortunate enough, they might take down something really big like a bison or mammoth. But the majority of their calories came from plants, nuts, berries, roots, seeds, edible leaves, fungi, whatever was in season and available in their immediate area. The women and children, and often some of the men, spent most of their day gathering plant foods while the designated hunters went after game. And here's where it gets interesting. Gathering success rates were much higher than hunting success rates, but the calorie yield per hour of work was often lower. You could spend all day collecting nuts and berries and come back with enough food to feed one person for one day. Send out 3 hunters, and if they got lucky and brought back a deer, that was meat for the whole group for several days. This created the first version of what economists call risk management. Steady, reliable food sources versus high-risk, high-reward opportunities. Most successful Stone Age groups learn to balance both strategies, just like a smart investor balances conservative savings with higher-risk investments. But unlike modern investors, they couldn't afford to lose their principal. One bad week of both hunting and gathering, and people started dying. So, how did they decide who got what when the hunters came back with dinner? How did they handle food distribution when there might not be enough to go around? How did they deal with the person who didn't contribute much to food procurement, but still expected to eat? First, let's understand that Stone Age food sharing wasn't based on our modern notions of individual property rights. When a hunter killed a deer, he didn't own that deer the way you own the groceries you bought at the store. The meat belonged to the group, and distribution was governed by social rules that had evolved over thousands of years to maximize group survival. Those rules weren't arbitrary. They were based on practical considerations that had been tested through generations of trial and error, where groups that got it wrong didn't survive to pass on their food-sharing practices. Basic principle: everyone got fed before anyone got seconds. Doesn't matter if you were the hunter who made the kill, the leader of the group, or the person who'd been lucky enough to find a beehive full of honey earlier that day. Basic survival needs took priority over individual preferences or personal contribution. Why? Because a group where some people got fat while others starved was a group that was going to fall apart fast. Starving people don't hunt effectively, don't gather efficiently, don't fight well when predators attack, and don't cooperate reliably in crisis situations. Keep everyone fed at subsistence level, and you maintain group cohesion and capability. But after basic needs were met, that's when things got political. The hunter who made the kill got first choice of the premium cuts. The person who spotted the game got consideration. The individual who provided the spear or trap that made the kill possible had a claim. Pregnant women nursing mothers, and young children got priority for the most nutritious portions. Elderly members who couldn't hunt or gather but provided valuable knowledge and experience still earned their share. And the person who contributed nothing, the guy who slept late, avoided dangerous work, complained about everything, and generally acted like a deadbeat brother-in-law at Thanksgiving dinner, that person had a problem. Stone Age groups couldn't afford freeloaders. Unlike modern society, where someone can coast on welfare, family support, or just plain luck, prehistoric survival required everyone to contribute something. If you couldn't hunt, you'd better be good at gathering. If you couldn't gather, you'd better be skilled at tool making, fire maintenance, or camp security. If you couldn't do any of those things, you'd better be providing something else of value: knowledge, entertainment, child care, spiritual leadership. But if you consistently took more than you gave, if you became a net drain on group resources, you faced social consequences that could escalate quickly from dirty looks to exile. An exile from a Stone Age group was usually a death sentence. The food distribution process itself was a carefully choreographed social ritual that reinforced group hierarchy, rewarded contribution, and managed conflicts before they could explode into violence. Picture the scene. The hunting party returns as the sun is setting. They've been successful. Maybe they got a deer, or caught several large fish, or managed to trap enough small game to provide meat for everyone. The whole camp knows they're coming because the children who were posted as lookouts saw them approaching and spread the word. Everyone gathers around the fire as the hunters display their catch. There's genuine excitement and relief because successful hunts weren't guaranteed, and everyone was probably getting pretty tired of whatever plant foods they'd been subsisting on. But nobody just rushes in and starts grabbing food. There was protocol. The lead hunter, usually the person who made the actual kill or organized the hunting party, took charge of the butchering process. This wasn't just about cutting up meat. It was about demonstrating their skill, their knowledge of anatomy, their ability to maximize the value of the kill by properly separating different cuts and organ meats. And it was about controlling distribution in a way that maintained social order. The heart went to the hunter who made the kill: tradition, honor, recognition of skill, and courage. The liver went to pregnant or nursing women: practical nutrition for the people who needed it most. The choicest cuts were divided among the senior members of the group. Age and experience earned privileges. The kidneys and other organ meats went to children and adolescents. Growing bodies needed the concentrated nutrients. Everything else was distributed based on a complex calculation of contribution, need, social status, and family relationships that would make a modern HR department's head spin. And here's what's crucial. The person doing the distributing had to get it right, make decisions that the group perceived as unfair or self-serving, and your authority as a leader eroded fast. Show favoritism to family members at the expense of group welfare, and you created resentments that could split the group apart. Stone Age leadership wasn't about having the biggest club or the loudest voice. It was about making decisions that kept the group alive and together, and food distribution was one of the most visible tests of leadership capability. The cooking process was equally important and equally organized. Not everyone just wandered off with their portion to eat wherever they felt like it. Meals were communal events that served multiple purposes beyond just nutrition. First, there was the practical aspect. Cooking over an open fire required coordination. Different cuts of meat needed different cooking times and temperatures. Some foods were roasted directly over flames. Others were wrapped in leaves and buried in coals. Still others were boiled in waterproof containers by dropping hot stones into liquid. Managing all of this without modern cookware required experience, timing, and cooperation. The camp's most skilled cooks, usually older women who'd been perfecting these techniques for decades, took charge of the cooking process, while others handled food preparation, fire management, and other supporting tasks. But the social aspect was just as important as the practical aspect. Sharing a meal around the fire reinforced group bonds, provided opportunities for sharing information and making plans, and allowed the group to maintain the relationships that were essential for survival. This was when the day's events got discussed. Who'd seen signs of predators in the area? Where were the best gathering spots for different types of plants? What was the weather likely to do tomorrow? Should the group move to a new location or stay put for another day or two? It was also when disputes got aired and resolved, when social problems got addressed before they became serious conflicts, when knowledge got passed from experienced members to younger ones. And it was when the group reinforced its identity and cohesion through storytelling, singing, and other forms of cultural expression that reminded everyone they were part of something larger than individual survival. Think about your own family dinners, or meals you've shared with close friends during camping trips or hunting expeditions. Some of your most important conversations, your strongest memories, probably happened around a table or a campfire when people were relaxed, well-fed, and in a sharing mood. Same thing happened around Stone Age campfires, except the stakes were higher and the social bonds were literally a matter of life and death. But what happened when the hunting was bad and the gathering was poor? What did Stone Age groups do when there simply wasn't enough food to go around? This is where the dinner table politics got really serious, and where the difference between a group that survived hard times and a group that fell apart became clear. Rationing was the first strategy. Instead of some people eating well while others went hungry, everyone's portions got reduced proportionally. The group could survive longer on inadequate nutrition than it could survive the conflicts and loss of cooperation that came from unequal food distribution. But rationing only worked for so long. Eventually, if the food situation didn't improve, harder decisions had to be made. Priority went to the individuals most essential for group survival, and most likely to recover quickly when food became available again. Pregnant women, because they were carrying the next generation. Prime-age adults, who were the most effective hunters and gatherers. Young children, because they represented the group's future and required less food to keep alive than adults. The elderly, the chronically ill, and anyone who couldn't contribute to group survival faced the possibility of being left behind when the group moved to new territory, or of receiving smaller food allocations that might not be sufficient for survival. This wasn't cruelty, it was triage. When resources are limited and survival is at stake, you have to make choices based on who's most likely to live and who's most essential for the group's continued existence. Modern emergency responders understand this principle. Stone Age groups lived it every day. And here's where the food sharing rules that seemed generous and egalitarian during good times revealed their darker purpose. Groups that had learned to cooperate and share fairly when resources were abundant were better equipped to make hard decisions and maintain cohesion when resources became scarce. Groups that had allowed individuals to hoard food, claim special privileges, or avoid their share of work during good times found themselves facing internal conflicts and loss of cooperation precisely when they most needed unity and discipline. The dinner table politics of the Stone Age weren't just about who got the best cuts of meat. They were about developing social systems that could function under pressure, leadership structures that could make difficult decisions, and group bonds strong enough to survive the worst possible circumstances. And those circumstances were about to get tested because the meal was finished. The fire was banked for the night, and the sounds were starting to come from the darkness beyond the firelight. Sounds that reminded everyone why they needed to stick together, why they needed to trust each other, and why the social bonds they'd strengthened around the dinner fire might be all that stood between them and a very unpleasant death. The night shift was about to begin, and it was time to find out who was really committed to group survival when the predators started prowling. You know that moment around 2 in the morning when something wakes you up and you're not sure what it was? Could have been the house settling, could have been a car door slamming down the street, could have been the cat knocking something over in the kitchen. You lie there in the dark for a few seconds, listening, trying to decide if it's worth getting up to investigate or if you can just roll over and go back to sleep. Most of the time, you choose sleep, because in your world, that mysterious sound probably isn't anything dangerous. Worst case scenario, someone's breaking into your garage to steal your lawnmower, and you've got insurance for that. More likely, it's just one of those random noises that houses make at night, and by morning, you'll have forgotten all about it. Now imagine that same scenario, except you're lying on the ground next to a dying fire, wrapped in animal skins, listening to sounds coming from a darkness so complete that you can't see your hand in front of your face. And you know for certain that some of those sounds are being made by creatures that see you as their next meal. That mysterious noise, it's not the house settling, it's something big moving through the brush 30 yards away. Something that's been circling your camp for the past hour, testing your defenses, looking for weakness, waiting for an opportunity. Welcome to the night shift in Stone Age world, where every sound had meaning, every silence was suspicious, and the difference between life and death often came down to how quickly you could interpret what you were hearing in the dark. Our ancestors became masters at reading the night soundscape the way you read the newspaper. They could tell you what was moving, how big it was, how far away it was, and whether it was just passing through or actively hunting. They developed an acoustic early warning system that would impress modern military communication specialists, and they did it with nothing but their ears and 40,000 years of accumulated wisdom. Think about how well you know the sounds of your own neighborhood. You can tell the difference between your neighbor's truck and the UPS delivery van without looking out the window. You know what the garbage truck sounds like on Tuesday morning, what time the school bus comes by, which dogs bark at strangers and which ones bark at everything. That's the level of familiarity our ancestors had with the night sounds of their territory, except their neighborhood was full of things that wanted to kill them. Let's start with the obvious threats, the big predators that our ancestors shared the landscape with. We're talking about creatures that make modern grizzly bears and mountain lions look like house pets, cave lions that stood 4 feet at the shoulder and weighed 600 pounds, short-faced bears that were 50% larger than modern grizzlies and could run 30 miles per hour, saber-toothed cats with 6-inch fangs designed for puncturing the skulls of prey animals, giant hyenas that hunted in packs and could crack mammoth bones with their jaws. These weren't animals you could scare off by making noise and looking big. These were apex predators that had been hunting large mammals for millions of years, and humans were just another species of large mammal as far as they were concerned. But here's what's interesting. The biggest predators weren't necessarily the most dangerous ones from a human perspective. The really big stuff, the cave bears and short-faced bears and massive cats, they were usually hunting prey that was much larger than humans. Mammoths, giant bison, woolly rhinos. We were too small to be worth their effort, most of the time. The predators that posed the greatest threat to human camps were the mid-sized hunters, wolves, regular-sized cave lions, leopards, hyenas. Animals that were big enough and powerful enough to kill humans, but for whom humans represented a reasonable target size. And all of these predators had different hunting patterns, different movement signatures, different sounds that told experienced listeners exactly what they were dealing with. Wolves were pack hunters, so you rarely heard just one wolf. If you picked up the sound of wolves in the area, you were probably hearing the advanced scouts of a larger group that was coordinating its movements through howls and other vocalizations. Wolves were smart, patient, and persistent. They'd probe your defenses for hours, looking for weaknesses, testing your alertness, waiting for someone to make a mistake. The sound signature of wolves, multiple animals moving in coordination, periodic howling that served as communication between pack members, the distinctive padding of paws on different types of ground. Experienced listeners could tell you how many wolves were in the area, which direction they were moving, and whether they were just passing through or actively hunting. Cave lions were solitary hunters, and they were good at moving silently. Most of the time, if a cave lion was stalking your camp, you wouldn't hear it until it was too late. But they weren't perfect at stealth, especially when they were moving through dense brush or over rocky ground. The sound of a large cat moving carefully was different from the sound of other animals, more deliberate, with longer pauses between movements. And cave lions had one weakness that experienced humans learned to exploit. They were curious. A smart Stone Age sentry could sometimes get a stalking lion to reveal its position by making subtle noises that triggered the cat's investigative instincts. Get the lion to move when it thought it was being stealthy, and you could track its position by sound. Hyenas were pack hunters like wolves, but they were more chaotic, less disciplined. Where wolves coordinated their movements with military precision, hyenas were more like a gang of teenagers looking for trouble. Lots of noise, lots of commotion, less strategic thinking. But hyenas were also more unpredictable. Wolves followed patterns that experienced humans could anticipate and counter. Hyenas might do anything. They were strong enough to drag away a full-grown human, smart enough to test different approaches to your camp, and crazy enough to keep trying even when they were taking losses. The sound signature of hyenas, cackling vocalizations, multiple animals moving without much coordination, the distinctive sound of powerful jaws crunching bones from previous kills. If you heard hyenas in the area, you knew you were in for a long night of constant vigilance. But the most dangerous predator sounds weren't always the most obvious ones. Sometimes the absence of normal night sounds was more ominous than the presence of predator sounds. You know how the woods go quiet just before a storm? All the birds stop singing, the insects stop buzzing, everything just goes silent. Same thing happened when a really dangerous predator moved into an area. The normal night sounds, owls, bats, small mammals moving through the underbrush, all stopped. That sudden silence was like having your smoke detector start beeping. It meant something was seriously wrong, and you needed to figure out what it was before it killed you. Our ancestors learned to read these patterns the way meteorologists read weather radar. Gradual decrease in background noise usually meant a predator was moving through the area, but not necessarily targeting your camp. Sudden silence followed by gradual return of normal sounds meant something big had passed by and was probably gone. Sudden silence with no return of normal sounds meant something was still out there, probably watching, probably planning. And then there were the sounds that weren't made by predators, but still meant trouble. Other human groups, for instance. Not all Stone Age humans were friendly neighbors interested in trade and cooperation. Some groups survived by raiding other camps, stealing resources, capturing people. A rival human group approaching your camp was often more dangerous than predators, because humans were the only species smart enough to plan coordinated attacks, use tools as weapons, and execute complex strategies. The sound signature of approaching humans was different from animal sounds in subtle but important ways. Humans moved with purpose and intelligence, but they also made different types of noise. The sound of stone tools against leather, muffled conversation, the distinctive rhythm of bipedal movement, and humans trying to approach stealthily made different mistakes than animals. Animals were naturally quiet when they wanted to be. Humans had to work at stealth, and they weren't always good at it. They stepped on twigs that animals would avoid, moved at rhythms that didn't match natural patterns, made tiny sounds that didn't belong in the night soundscape. Experienced sentries could sometimes detect human raiders before the raiders knew they'd been spotted, which provided opportunities for ambush or escape that could save the entire group. But reading the night sounds wasn't just about identifying threats. It was also about understanding the normal rhythm of night activity that told you everything was okay. Healthy night sounds, owls calling, bats hunting insects, small mammals foraging, the normal rustling of nocturnal animals going about their business. These sounds meant the ecosystem was functioning normally. Predators weren't dominating the area, and your camp wasn't under immediate threat. Changes in the pattern of normal sounds could provide early warning of approaching problems. If the owl calls stopped coming from the north side of your camp, something was moving through that area. If the bat activity decreased suddenly, a larger predator had probably entered their hunting grounds. If small mammals stopped rustling in the underbrush, They were hiding from something. Our ancestors developed communication systems that let them share acoustic information without alerting potential threats to their awareness. Hand signals that worked in firelight, bird calls that sounded natural but carried specific meanings, rock throws that created diversionary sounds, whispered conversations that used specialized vocabularies for describing threats and movements. They learned to position sentries so that overlapping hearing coverage eliminated blind spots and dead zones. They developed rotation schedules that kept the most alert people on duty during the highest risk hours. They created backup plans for different threat scenarios, communication protocols for emergency situations, and fallback positions for when the main camp became untenable. This wasn't just random guys taking turns staying awake. This was a sophisticated early warning and defense system operated by people who understood that a single mistake could cost everyone their lives. And it worked. We know it worked because we're here talking about it. Our ancestors survived thousands of generations of nights surrounded by predators that could kill them without breaking stride. They outlasted ice ages, volcanic eruptions, climate changes, and countless other catastrophes that wiped out entire species. They didn't do it by being bigger, stronger, or faster than their predators. They did it by being smarter, more organized, and better at cooperation. They survived because they learned to read the night like a book, to communicate silently and effectively, and to function as a coordinated unit when individual survival was impossible. But even the best early warning systems and the most sophisticated defensive strategies couldn't eliminate all risks. Sometimes, despite all precautions and preparations, things went wrong. Predators got past the sentries. Rival groups launched successful attacks. Injuries and illnesses struck at the worst possible times. And when that happened, when the night sounds turned from warnings into immediate threats, our ancestors had to deal with emergencies using nothing but Stone Age technology, their own skills, and whatever courage they could muster in the face of very real dangers. The acoustic landscape of terror was about to become the soundtrack to survival, and every decision made in the next few minutes could determine whether anyone would be alive to see another sunset. Those carefully organized sleeping arrangements, the social hierarchies that determined who slept where and who stayed awake when, were about to be tested under the ultimate pressure, real life or death combat, where the stakes couldn't be higher and there were no second chances.